Have you ever observed those individuals who effortlessly command attention without raising their voice? They don't plead. They don't demand. They simply withdraw. And in that withdrawal, everything shifts. The atmosphere transforms. People begin to question, to pursue, to experience genuine emotion. Now imagine yourself adopting this approach. What if instead of immediately responding to every stimulus, you chose deliberate silence? What if rather than explosive reactions, you opted for thoughtful retreat? Consider the implications. When you cease being perpetually available, emotionally, physically, psychologically, the world around you experiences disruption. Because many have grown accustomed to manipulating you through your predictable reactions, your immediate responses, your consistent impulses. The moment you choose withdrawal, you change the rules of engagement. Those who believed they understood you suddenly realize they comprehend nothing. As the renowned psychologist once noted, what irritates us about others often reflects something we need to understand about ourselves. This becomes strikingly evident when you make yourself less accessible. Who becomes distressed by your unavailability? Who grows irritated? Who attempts to provoke you simply to extract an emotional response? These reactions reveal far more about others than about you. More importantly, they expose how subtly you've been manipulated without recognizing it. You've been surrendering pieces of yourself to please, to maintain harmony, to retain people who, in truth, were never genuinely committed to you. With each forced affirmation, each immediate response, each emotional reaction, you sacrifice a portion of your vital energy. By day's end, what remains? Exhaustion, frustration, an inexplicable emptiness. The reason is clear. You've made yourself too accessible to those who haven't earned even a moment of your considered silence. From childhood, you've been conditioned to remain present, to respond promptly, to accommodate, to affirm even when your instinct is to decline. You've internalized the belief that your worth correlates with your availability to others. Here's an uncomfortable truth. This excessive accessibility isn't virtuous, it's imprisoning. As long as you believe you must remain constantly available, you will continue to be manipulated, depleted, and discarded once your utility expires. The reason is simple. Constant availability renders you predictable, and predictability transforms you into a tool. People begin treating you as an emotional resource, accessed when they require attention, comfort, or validation, then shelved until the next need arises. You fail to recognize this pattern because you're trapped in the illusion that universal availability will ensure someone remains available for you. This equation doesn't balance. The psychological concept of the persona, the social mask we adopt for acceptance and recognition, is precisely what keeps you excessively available. You express contentment while suffocating. You respond to messages instantaneously despite exhaustion. You explain, justify, and defend yourself as though indebted to the world. The truth remains, the more prominently you feature in others' narratives, the more completely you vanish from your own. Perpetual availability constitutes a subtle form of self-abandonment, a disguised pursuit of approval, an attempt to avoid rejection, an effort to control others' perceptions of you. This control exacts a price, your tranquility. Your vital energy distributed as though infinite when it is, in fact, profoundly limited. Those demanding your constant availability don't truly want you, they want what you provide. Validation, companionship, distraction, emotional support. When you establish boundaries, when you refuse to react according to expectation, these same individuals grow irritated, accusatory, critical. Not because you've changed, but because you've ceased being functional for their purposes. Here lies the cruelest paradox. The more available you remain, the less value others assign to you. What exists in abundance becomes emotionally worthless. No one respects what requires no effort to obtain. No one values what remains perpetually accessible. Pause and consider, who genuinely deserves your time? Your attention? Your presence? Your listening ear? Perhaps more importantly, who deserves your absence? Before answering these questions, we must examine a fundamental issue. Why do we react so readily? Why do we yield so easily? What drives this almost automatic compulsion to respond, justify, and please? The answer lies in what psychologists call psychic energy. Your psychological energy represents the totality of your resources. If you don't learn to safeguard it, someone will inevitably weaponize it against you. The human psyche isn't a mechanical system reacting to stimuli without consequence. Rather, it functions as an energy system where every thought, emotion, and action consumes a portion of our limited resources. The critical question becomes, are you consciously directing your energy, or are you allowing external forces to dictate its expenditure? Each impulsive reaction wastes psychological energy. Defending yourself against insignificant criticism, responding to deliberate provocation, engaging in pointless debates, attempting to please those who don't value you, all deplete your inner resources without nourishment in return. Remember this principle: what you resist persists. The more reactive you become, the more firmly you bind yourself to unwanted circumstances. Those experiencing chronic emotional depletion aren't inherently weak, they're misdirected. And what happens to someone living in perpetual exhaustion? They become vulnerable. When vulnerability becomes your baseline state, you transform into accessible prey. Manipulative, opportunistic, and emotionally needy individuals intuitively recognize when you cannot protect your energy boundaries. They observe your indiscriminate reactivity, your compulsion to resolve every situation, and they exploit these tendencies. A healthy psyche knows how to conserve energy within its system. This means declining without guilt, remaining silent without cowardice, observing before acting. True power resides not in reaction but in the deliberate choice of when and how to act. This becomes possible only when you understand yourself sufficiently to recognize your own impulses. How often have you sacrificed sleep over unresolved conversations? How many hours have you spent ruminating on what should have been said or attempting to understand others' poor treatment of you? This represents energy dissipated without return, maintaining psychological ghosts that should have long been laid to rest, sustaining dynamics that persist solely because of your continued engagement. Psychological energy functions like a protective field. When properly maintained, it generates presence. You enter a room and command respect without uttering a word. When poorly managed, you become invisible, reactive, fragile. And society shows no mercy to those who yield easily. Begin observing your triggers. What prompts automatic reactions? What disrupts your center? These points represent energy leakage. You may believe your reactions represent conscious choices, but the reality is darker. Most emotional responses follow programmed patterns, and those who understand this manipulate you effortlessly. Manipulative individuals need not raise their voices, threaten, or force situations. They simply activate your exposed triggers, and you react predictably. Psychological projection, the mechanism through which people attribute to others what they cannot recognize in themselves, has another dimension few acknowledge. While others project onto you, you simultaneously become the receptacle for these projections. The more emotionally available you remain, the more completely you transform into a blank canvas for others' projections. Consider the friend who contacts you exclusively during personal crises, the partner who consistently positions you as the rescuer, the person who praises you only when you serve their purposes. These patterns aren't coincidental. These individuals aren't relating to you, they're relating to their concept of you, to the role you've agreed to perform. And why do you agree? Because you fear disappointing others, fear being unloved, fear abandonment. The most effective manipulation doesn't occur through confrontation but through the silence of guilt. When you feel indebted to another, when you believe you must remain available, must help, must understand, even as it internally destroys you. The manipulator doesn't need to control you directly. They need only ensure you continue reacting predictably. When you cease reacting, the dynamic collapses. When you begin declining, responding with silence, withdrawing rather than explaining, the projections begin disintegrating. The mask they've placed upon you falls away. This creates disorientation because they no longer recognize you. Worse, they're now forced to confront themselves, a prospect for which few are prepared. Your unavailability represents a threat because it compels others to face their own emptiness. The silence you offer exposes the internal noise they've been avoiding. Then comes the attack, the criticism, the emotional drama, not because you're wrong, but because you've stopped functioning as a convenient mirror. As the psychologist noted, we achieve enlightenment not by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When you withdraw, when you interrupt the cycle, others' shadows begin emerging. This becomes unbearable for those who have consistently used you as an escape. But what about you? Are you prepared to endure the discomfort of being misunderstood, rejected, or attacked for self-protection? Are you ready to withstand the silence following rupture? Because precisely within that silence, a new form of power emerges. In our cacophonous modern world, everyone seeks to be heard, to respond instantly, to triumph in meaningless debates and prove their position, even at the cost of personal peace. Yet there exists a power few comprehend and fewer master, the power of silence. Not the silence of passivity or cowardice, but conscious, strategic, lucid silence. The kind that doesn't represent absence but amplified presence. Psychology views silence not as emptiness but as fertile ground for internal transformation. When you stop reacting, you begin observing. Through observation, you recognize previously unnoticed patterns, emotional repetitions, manipulation tactics, self-sabotage cycles. Silence fosters lucidity, and lucidity threatens those who live to control you. Have you noticed how certain individuals panic when you don't respond? When you don't explain yourself? When you simply disappear? Not because they miss you, but because your silence removes their narrative control. While speaking, you remain within their game. In silence, you transform the rules, destabilizing anyone who thrives on your reactivity. Authentic silence isn't absence of voice, it's mastery over personal energy. It's refusing to be drawn into others' emotional states. It's consciously choosing not to engage in battles unworthy of your resources. The process of becoming your authentic self requires this distance because only in silence can you hear yourself without the world's interference. Silence carries a price. It will distance you from those who valued you only for your functional role. It will render you incomprehensible to those who perceived you solely through their projections. It may make you appear cold, distant, arrogant. But these responses come from individuals who never sought to engage with your depth, only with your utility. The harsh truth, as you mature, you become increasingly selective with your words, understanding that each sentence represents an energetic investment and not everyone deserves access to your truth. Sometimes silence isn't retreat, it's sovereignty. It's the language of those no longer needing to prove anything to anyone. Silence creates discomfort because it forces others to confront their thoughts, their internal noise. This discomfort reveals more about them than any argument could disclose. You need not explain your absence, it explains itself. Those threatened by it reveal their dependence on your imbalance to maintain their control. The most powerful silence isn't that which disturbs others but that which internally reconstructs you, connecting you to something beyond external validation. In this internal space, free from others' demands, you begin recovering vital energy and reconnecting with your essence. Intellectual understanding proves worthless if you continue affirming when you mean to decline, responding to disturbing messages, participating in empty conversations, and maintaining relationships existing solely through inertia. Awareness without action becomes another form of self-deception. True transformation begins with a firm decision to become selective, requiring emotional discipline. Conscious unavailability isn't about coldness, arrogance, or indifference. It's about no longer being accessible to everyone, anytime, for any reason. It's about reclaiming control of your energy, time, and peace. This begins with small actions, delaying responses, breathing before reacting, exiting discussions before chaos ensues, turning off devices without guilt, saying, "Not today. I'm not interested. I won't participate." Most importantly, you need not justify your absence or explain your silence. You owe nothing to anyone but yourself. For many, this proves unforgivable because when you refuse explanation, you remove others' power to maintain you within an emotional narrative where you remain perpetually helpful, understanding, and accessible. Psychology recognizes that every process of self-actualization involves isolation, Not depressive isolation but sacred withdrawal, an internal retreat where you relearn hearing your voice without external interference, rebuilding identity based not on others' perceptions but from your center. A reliable measure of your evolution. Observe who distances themselves when you become more reserved, who attempts to provoke you when conscious unavailability forms the foundation of self-determination. When you decline external demands, you affirm yourself. When you withdraw from toxic environments, you reaffirm that your peace outvalues any false connection. When you stop explaining yourself, you begin commanding respect, even if from few. Not everyone stands ready for this presence because your emotional absence will expose wounds they prefer not to face, revealing their dependence on your emotional chaos for their sense of control. Here emerges rupture, accompanied by pain, loneliness, estrangement, the sensation of loss when you're actually achieving freedom. When you cease universal availability, something profound develops. Initially comes silence, uncomfortable silence seemingly screaming within. You question your choices, wondering if you're being excessive, if you're losing people who valued you. Gradually, this silence transforms, cleansing, calming, healing. Then comes solitude, not absence but complete presence, your own. The solitude of strength, of one who no longer betrays themselves to maintain proximity to others. In this space, formerly filled with confusion, clarity enters. Where anxiety resided, peace arrives. Where neediness existed, a new strength emerges, the strength of wholeness within yourself. The process of becoming your authentic self requires distancing from collective expectations, removing the mask, walking independently for a time. This precisely describes your journey toward unavailability, not fleeing the world but returning to yourself. At this juncture, you transition from reactor to creator, from being shaped by circumstances to shaping reality from within. Those uncomfortable with your absence reveal they never wanted you, they wanted the role you played. Now that you no longer conform, they don't know how to engage with you. This realization liberates. You will lose people but find yourself. You will distance yourself from places but reconnect with your essence. You will be misunderstood but finally respected. When you're no longer universally available, you become valuable, rare, unforgettable. This represents rebirth, the beginning of a life where you're no longer available for emotional scraps, manipulation, or emptiness disguised as affection. Now you accept only what resonates with your peace, your truth, your completeness. If you've read this far, part of you stands ready for this path. Part of you understands that being loved means nothing if it requires self-abandonment. True self-love begins when you choose yourself, even at the temporary cost of solitude. Are you prepared to be misunderstood, rejected, even disliked in pursuit of inner freedom? Are you willing to pay the price of authenticity? If this message resonates, if it makes sense to you, acknowledge to yourself, I choose my peace.